May we have your attention, please? The session is about to begin. Please take your seat.
Good morning and welcome to this strategic dialogue, Downstream Strategies, Adapting to a Shifting Demand Landscape. My name is Daniel Evans. I'll be moderating this session. So, first of all, thank you very much for getting up early and being here to join us. I appreciate it. I also know it gets more and more difficult as the week goes on. It's difficult for me too. My grandmother always told me I was not a morning person. I beg to differ, but I'll let you judge that as we go through the session. So I'm going to just introduce the session, then I'll introduce the panel, and we'll dive into the discussion. So I think the direction of travel is quite clear for the downstream industry. Peak demand is looming, the pressure to reduce emissions is increasing, and the scene is set for what we think is going to be an incredibly dynamic investment environment. But at the same time, oil demand has never been higher. It's still growing, and the refining industry has been incredibly stretched over the past couple of years, and that's translated into a period of high profitability, of high margins. So I think that's the dilemma that we're grappling with. On one hand, major investments are required to transform the industry. On the other, the market is calling for the industry to do more of what it has been doing, producing reliable, affordable fuels and chemicals at scale. So to discuss that, I'm delighted to welcome 4 panelists who are grappling with that issue day after day. So from KIPIC, the head of corporate planning, Abdullah Al-Ossaimi, welcome. Amber Russell from BP. Amber is the SVP for the refining, terminals and pipelines business. From Schneider Electric, Chris Dartnell, SVP for the power systems business, but previously leading oil, gas, and petrochemicals. And from Sinopec, the Deputy Managing Director of the R&D department, Mr. Yuan. Welcome to you all. So let's start by discussing the downstream operating environment, the policy environment, the demand environment that you're operating in. And Abdullah, I'd like to start with you. I think it's quite a complex environment, as we've heard over the past 2 days. I mean, what are some of the most significant uncertainties that you see out there?
Thank you, Dan. First of all, good morning, everyone. Let me start with sharing with you some of the challenges that we see, in the current market and in the going, to the future. There are some macro, challenges that oil refiners that faces. Basically, I would summarize some of those into a couple of points, starting with the mobility fuel. And each year we're seeing there is more stringent requirement on the mobility fuel and the requirement of making low carbon emission fuel. That puts a lot of pressure on the refineries. Now, also, the geopolitics unrest, that's something you cannot anticipate, but definitely it put a lot of pressure on the producers. Starting with the Ukraine war, going to Gaza conflict issue, the Red Sea now. So this is all, going forward, not anticipating these challenges will definitely put a pressure. We heard also many of the speeches for the last 2 days talking about those challenges. Now, on the other hand, also, what we have been discussing today in the CERAWeek and then for the couple of years CERAWeeks, basically the energy transition and the environmental pressure. So that's something also we feel. That's something also we anticipate that we have to work very close with the requirement for meeting the energy transition requirement, the carbon credits that will be coming up, producing low, environmental or low emission fuels. That's something we are aware of. Now, how is this impact the current project that we are pursuing or the future ones? It's definitely putting a pressure on the, the visibility of those, opportunities that we're pursuing, pressure on your partners, how they are also looking at dealing with this energy transition agenda. So all of this really coming together as a macro challenges for the oil refiners. In Kuwait also looking at the, if I look at, KIPIC and our refinery and our business, that's something also we have local challenges as well. Since we are we're mandated to produce, clean fuel for the power sector. Also, a challenge for us is how to anticipate the future requirement of the power plant and the demand, understanding the behavior of the individuals, understanding, what's the future requirement of the power plant. Are they going to be requiring liquid fuel or gas? That's something also we have to deal with. So what do we do about it? Basically, we're looking at some opportunities of how to convert that excess, available hydrocarbons into more profitable projects or more value-added products that we can mitigate that risk. So there are macro, there are internal challenges we have to deal with.
Yeah, sounds like quite a lot of uncertainties there that you're dealing with. So Amber, let me turn to you. I mean, I think I said in my introduction, the direction of travel for the industry is clear. Is that something you agree with?
So I think that the direction of travel being clear, I would say yes. I think what we've found is that the pace at which we get there is what I feel is in flux. There's just been a lot of uncertainty where we recognize a lot of our governments and what they want to accomplish from a reduction in emissions perspective. A lot of times their policies don't actually support that in a consistent way, and that's what the challenge has been created.
Yeah, so digging into that a little bit, I mean, policy and technology are obviously two areas where there is significant uncertainty. Which is the most challenging for you to assess, to manage?
So I would say right now in the forefront, it's clearly around the policy. As I mentioned, I think over the last couple of years, I think despite the best intentions, the policy changes that we've seen don't necessarily support where we all want to get to in the right way. And we've seen things like bio subsidies or mandates start to shift with the cost of living crisis and pull those back. And that has called into question our investments, which then calls into the question of what the pace is and what the right timing is to make sure that we're not losing value. So I think squarely that's the challenge right now. The good thing about that is, I do see that it has forced us to have a deeper and more connected relationship in that regulatory environment. And if I look at the next big challenge, it's around the technology. That is the next one, because today we're mostly processing and managing biofeedstocks and hydrotreating. That's what we've always done. And so that's not necessarily new, but as we expand into different feedstocks, we are seeing some tricky things. And you look at the next phase of e-fuels and then running hydrogen in furnaces, I'm not necessarily sure that we have our hands around that as well as I would like yet.
Okay, well, that's interesting, and maybe Chris can help, right? Because you're looking at this from a technology perspective, of course, but not just looking at the refining industry, right? So, Chris, I mean, given some of the uncertainties that we're seeing, but given the overall direction of travel, what do you think is going to surprise us about the energy transition?
Morning, folks. I think the surprise is the uncertainty. I mean, it's unusual listening in CERA over a few years that there's such a diversity of views on where we're heading, and it's the most uncertainty I've seen on demand, I think, because we're unclear where the policy is going, where the customer sentiment is going, and therefore what that means for refining and what it means for suppliers to bring the right technologies. Because if I live in Europe, if you look at the Europe view, it's pretty resolutely towards the electric and hydrogen future. You see Norway banning the internal combustion engine next year, Netherlands in 2030, UK 2035. Fundamental changes to fuel demand. The picture in the US is quite different. The picture in the Middle East is different. The way Middle East has a view around net zero in operation, but still in good production levels. So assessing where demand is going must be immensely difficult for the operator, and therefore how to plan. I think on technology, and I'm sure we'll come on to this in the coming minutes, but digital and AI technology has to be a big part of bringing the agility and flexibility to refiners.
Yeah, I could see the heads nodding on the panel when you were talking about the uncertainty on the demand side there. Abdullah, you mentioned some of the geopolitical uncertainty around that you're dealing with, right? And I think over the past couple of years, energy security has become a major issue. So, Mr. Yuan, your president is going to be talking to Dan Jurgen later this morning. The topic is around energy security and the energy transition. So can you give us a bit of a preview of what we might hear?
好的，大家好啊，抱歉，我只能用中文给大家演讲。稍晚的时候，我们赵东总经理将与叶金先生进行对话。能源安全与能源转型是我们公司非常关注的一个问题。从我们的观点来看，能源转型的前提是要保障能源的安全。只有这样，你才能满足民众对于能源的需求，特别是对于我们一个发展中国家来说，这个能源需求的增长是持续的，这是第一个观点哈。我想，对于能源的安全来说，我们认为，在未来的相当长一段时间，这个化石能源在中国还是将作为一个主要的能源来源。我们预测，大概到2040年左右，石油和天然气的这个占比仍然将保持在接近50%的比重，这是一个基本观点。然后另外一方面呢，能源转型来说，中国石化非常关注能源的多样化，包括现在在做的一些事情。今天上午赵东先生会详细的讲我们能源结构的变化，以及中国石化在新能源以及替代能源方面所做的一些事情，包括氢能、生物质能等。我讲完了。
Okay, so thank you very much for the comments, and it sounds like you're involved in lots of different areas of the business, so we'll come back to that and sort of talk about how you see those pieces fitting together a little bit later. But I think what we've heard is that the operating environment is changing quite significantly. It's becoming quite much more complex to navigate, right, both on the policy and the technology side. Significant regional differences, right, as you know, all week we've been talking about this multi-dimensional transition. So I think business as usual is clearly not going to work for the refining industry. So let's turn now and talk a little bit about what the future holds. So Abdullah, coming back to you, when you think about the refinery of the future, what does that look like?
The future refineries, I mean, they have to do, you know, multiple, you know, actions in order to sustain in the business. Definitely, there will be more pressure from the environmental requirement, but basically, those who's going to be surviving in the future are the one who's already invested in the integration. Those the one who's already back integrated with some of the petrochemical. Definitely, they're going to be surviving in terms of you know, the margins. Also, in the other hand, future refinery, they have to acknowledge the requirement of adapting to the energy transition. So the low carbon emission, that's something they have to work on. So what we are doing, basically, we are acknowledging all this, and we are issuing multiple, studies. We are doing multiple efforts at our refinery to make sure that we are adapting to the future. Certainly, working on your low cost, of how you operate the business, looking at your, carbon emissions from like main sources, like the FCC unit, etc. These are all the things and all the, opportunities. If you don't capture them today, definitely in the future we'll be, facing challenges of disposing your products.
So you're sitting on one of the newest refineries in the world.
Exactly.
Are you feeling confident about your ability to navigate the transition?
We're lucky. We just came on stream, and last December we fully commissioned our refinery. So we are producing, competent, products that meets, the European standards, products that they are low in emission. So I think we are enjoying some of the market right now. Also, we are aware of the future requirements, so we are having multiple, studies that we are initiated that deals with, these future requirements.
So, if I hear you correctly, you're feeling good, but you're not being complacent about the future.
Currently, we're feeling good, but definitely in the future, we know there are more homework that we have to do.
Okay. You mentioned integration. I want to come back to that in terms of business models and also sort of the role that petrochemical integration can play in the refinery of the future. But Chris, I mean, you mentioned that you see very different things from around the world. Here we've got representatives from 4 global countries, but you sit in 4 different regions. I mean, Chris, tell us a little bit about the challenges that your customers are facing from region to region and what you see companies doing.
The regional differences, I think, are getting stronger. And then the refineries that I think are going to be more successful, as Abdullah was saying, are larger, they're integrated, they're much more digitally enabled, which seems a challenge with the safety and the cybersecurity that you need. But I think to be as agile as you need to be able to manage the fuels and the change in demand and supply and flexible to the market is going to be huge. And then the challenge of being able to manage your capital allocation, I think, is going to be huge, because it's we were looking at the future of motor fuel in Europe, right? And there's a school of thought that says it's down 90% by 2050, which is the bold EV vision of the electric community. But then there's another equally valid school of thought that says biofuels come and they're accepted and they can be rebranded as new biogasoline, and it has a completely different view, and how that changes. So that ability to be flexible and agile, I think, is going to be huge, and how we blend artificial intelligence into what is a very highly regulated, safety-conscious industry is going to be quite a big deal.
90% decline in demand by 2050, that's scary stuff. So, Mr. Yuan, I'm going to ask you a question about China and how you see the demand outlook there, because I think China is a part of the world where we see the energy transition happening very, very quickly. I mean, what are you seeing and how are you responding to that?
中国的能源转型确实与其他国家与地区不太一样，这个速度非常快，有2个方面的原因。第一个就是中国政府对于碳达峰、碳中和的承诺，我们企业的要求是，这个碳达峰、碳中和的时间要早于政府承诺的时间，这是一个政策要求。第2个原因就是民众对于电动车或者是新能源车的接受程度，可能比国外更加能够接受吧。所以基于这2个原因，所以这个转型是比其他国家都要快。有一个数据哈，倒是去年中国的新能源车的渗透率，就是新能源车销售量占整个汽车销售量的比例，已经达到了31.6%。这个数字在其他国家可能是没有的，所以对于我们传统的石油化工公司来说，这个转型的压力非常的大。另外一方面呢，我们为了应对这种转型， 我们认为一体化是一个非常重要的手段，包括炼油与化工的耦合就是炼油厂跟化工厂都是世界级的。我们现在有6个世界级的炼油化工一体化的基地。另外，我们也在尝试着关停一些小规模的炼油厂，因为它的能耗很高，费用很高。有一些小型炼油厂也会转型去做一些特种的油品、润滑油、化学品。另外一个就是在生物质这块，我们也在发展生物航酶、生物柴油等，现在也有示范装置，大概在10万吨级规模吧。而且我们的生物燃料也已经通过了航空的商业飞行，这是我们基本的情况。
Okay, that's all really interesting. I just want to pick up on one thing you mentioned there, and it's about closing assets. So do you think that there will be significant amount of closures in China, refinery closures in China in, say, the next five years?
不会很多，是这样的啊，一些小的没有竞争力的可能会关闭。在中国，关于成品油的消费，大概在5年之内会达峰，达到最高值。但是，对于化工原料的需求，还是会持续的增长。所以，基于这个原因，炼油的能力可能不会有特别大的减少，基本是这个情况。
Okay, thank you. We're going to come back and talk about petrochemical integration, but I want to talk a little bit now, Amber, about business models. I mean, you have a pretty big integrated portfolio, right? So I think, first of all, is that integrated model something that you think is going to continue to be important for the future?
So in BP, when we, our transition from where we've been in the past, an international oil company into an integrated energy company, has really challenged us of how to work across that whole value chain. And I think about where we've struggled. We would have struggled more had we not had that integrated view. And I do think, while it creates the challenges, it has forced us to look and try to capture value across that. And I think what we've found definitely, because as the regulatory environment is changing, it has been very critical for us to have a bit of insight into each part of those businesses. And so trying to, take from the upstream side of our company has been very valuable from a subsurface perspective when we're looking into CCS. When I look at our midstream team and our trading and shipping teams, they're very critical. They've always been helping us on crude purchases and getting products into the market. Same thing with bio, and so having that integration across the company has been extremely helpful. And I think from a BP perspective, we feel like, the more that we can do that, the more success we will have.
So that level of integration brings value. What about the geographical diversity of the portfolio, right? Because the policy challenges, the options, the opportunities are different depending on where you are in the world. Is that more of a problem, or is it also an opportunity?
Yes and no. So a little bit about the portfolio. So we've got 2 refineries in the U.S., one in Washington State and then one in Indiana. And then we've got 4 that are in Europe, 2 in Germany, 1 in the Netherlands, and 1 in Spain. And we, about a year and a half ago, shut down a refinery in Australia. And I think that going in, as we're looking at how do you leverage your existing hydrocarbon base into biofuels, into SAF and hydrogen, and you're thinking, is the refinery refineries, great, let's take this, let's copy and paste. And I would say, boy, I couldn't have been more wrong. Because each asset is different, each market is different, and the regulatory landscape in each country and even in each region is very different. So it's given us an optionality to experiment on, in some cases, and learn, but what is valued in each one of those markets and regions is very, very different and changes significantly. I think what has been common for us is that we know our number one priority is to redefine our refineries into what we call integrated energy hubs, and that is just, it's kind of the terminology that we use, that how do you integrate and give yourself the flexibility for leveraging your existing hydrocarbon base while you continue to build on co-processing, looking at what SAF opportunities are out there, and how do you start to leverage hydrogen to reduce emissions.
Okay. So this first part of the discussion has sort of been quite a lot of, some concerned looks from you, right, about how we're going to face down the challenges that the energy transition is going to bring. But the past couple of years have been pretty good from a refiner perspective, right? Challenging in another way in terms of meeting demand, but the margin environment has been good. So I guess, Amber, to start with you, through this period, keeping reliability high, keeping utilization high has obviously been a main focus area. How have you done that?
So we do still have our moments, not so glorious moments, but when we think about what is really important, I think about it in three areas. I would say it's, the people, performance, and processes. Our people are at the heart of our operations, and I don't ever want to lose sight of that because it's important for me to make them successful. It's important for us to understand how work is actually happening in the field, because that's where the challenges and what you think is really going on can be different. We are very focused on upskilling and making sure that we have the right competency for our people, whether that's the operator in the field or our engineers. When I think about performance, we're very focused on driving our performance from an availability perspective, and that is leveraging the units that are the most critical and making sure that we're eliminating those defects and really having the right reliability systems in place and driving the delivery of that. And then the last piece is on processes, and a bit to what Chris had said about AI and digitization, is having a portfolio that we have in BP that's made up of heritage, different cultures. Standardization is really important, and it's really, really hard to do. I would say, sometimes it's like job security forever, but it's one of those things we have got to focus on digitizing our end-to-end process and making sure that that is in place, because it makes our people successful and it makes our performance much more predictable and efficient.
So, Chris, I'll turn this question over to you as we're talking about digitalization. So we talked about some of the solutions for the future, right? But is that an area where you see refiners focusing right now? What can they do right now to kind of keep availability high?
Yes, and I think digitization is more of a journey than an inflection point. And I think downstream has probably been one of the most digital industries historically. So as a juxtaposition, Schneider, we do a lot of work with public utility grids. And when you look at the level of automation, possibly because it's state sector and the investment climate is regulated, but the level of automation is completely different as it would be in refining. So refining starts with a strong base of automation. What's been happening over the last 10 or 15 years is stronger and stronger data integration and digitization of using current technologies. So, example in trading, if you integrate your crude analysis and your planning and your scheduling, you can make crude buy decisions in minutes rather than days, right? Just by the ability to process. And that's huge in terms of your margins and your profitability. So those technologies exist, and we're doing a lot of that. What I think's coming is generative AI, which is making the decisions for you, right? And helping to get ahead of those decisions, and that's right through from strategic planning of your fuel base through to empowering your maintenance tech with heads-up displays and the latest information to solve the problems quickest.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about generative AI, and I know your CEO was pretty coy about how you're using it for trading, Amber, so I'm not going to put you on the spot there. But Abdullah, maybe a question for you. With margins being so good and you ramping up production at the refinery in Kuwait, what are you focused on right now?
As I mentioned, we just completed the full commissioning of our refinery. The refinery consists of 3 trains, basically 3 mini refineries. So the last one was commissioned early December of last year. So what we are focusing on right now is basically reaching the maximum design capacity, and that's something we achieved successfully, and we sustained it for several weeks. Second things, now we're focused on processing the different crude being produced in the upstream. So the refinery is uniquely designed not to only handle certain API for crude, but all the crude, and mainly the heavy one. Also, that's something we are now testing. For the next 4 or 5 months, we're focused on completing all the test runs. But we're really enjoying, pushing the refinery to its maximum, and it is proving quite successfully.
So can you do those test runs and also keep, processing above 600,000 barrels a day?
Exactly. So we attained the 615,000 barrel. Not only this, Dan, also we get requirement from our marketing folks in KPC to produce specific, fuel like diesel and kero for certain, regions like Europe. And we have been enjoying the European market. Now, as I mentioned, the geopolitical unrest between Russia and Ukraine, it's opened up an opportunity for other producers, like the sanction on Russia made our product, especially the diesel, goes to Europe, and that's make us enjoy some of the margins. Other activities that we're doing as well, we're learning also from our peer, refineries, how to lower our operating cost, how to, turn the units from the catalyst change in a fast manner. There are, many producers in the world, like the Asian. Now they start doing it in 2 weeks, changing the catalyst. So that's something for us is important. That's something for us at the end will push our, performance and our margin. So we are in a stage now where we're fulfilling all the fuel requirement for our domestic power plant, as well as exporting to major markets like Europe, Asia, etc.
Yeah, so there's a technical aspect to it, but also a market aspect, right? So you're very conscious of what's been happening around you.
The key, Dan, is focusing on producing, clean fuel. I mean, or clean, products that can meet the requirement of the European market, etc. So we are making the fuel oil, and I think now we are uniquely positioned in the market, producing 0.5 sulfur, and that's something make us enjoy the margin that we are attaining.
Yeah. So you mentioned the trade reshuffle after the sanctions on Russia. So thank you for keeping fuel in our tanks in Europe. We appreciate it. But one of the big questions, right, as we've seen this tightness in the product market, has been the role that China is going to play, right? Because I think China is one of the regions of the world where there is spare refining capacity. So are there any plans to increase exports to bring some relief to tight product markets?
中国石化确实现在的炼油的产能确实是相对是过剩的。我在中国的市场，民营企业发展非常的快，现在炼油能力的增长主要是在民营企业，所以我们现在的开工率大概是接近80%，所以我们也有一些产品出口的计划。另外一个呢，中国也在倡导“一带一路”的这个倡导吧，所以我们的出口有一部分成品油，主要是在东南亚以及周边国家，这个份额不是很高啊，当然也受国家这个出口配额的限制。另外一个在生物燃料方面，我们主要还是自己用，当然也有一些国外的公司对我们的生物燃料的技术感兴趣，我们现在还没有走出来，这是第二个。第三个呢，就是在化工产品方面，我们现在也为了打通炼油到化工，就是从燃料到原料的这个流程，所以我们在化工也在相对来说是在加大这个出口的力度，特别是一些符合西方或者是发达国家需要的一些产品的，这一块呢也是拉动我们原油以及炼油能力消耗的一个手段。第三个就是在技术方面，因为中国石化也算是一个技术公司，所以我们在“一带一路”国家帮助他们建设一些炼油或者是化工品的产能，这一块跟我们其实并不是很竞争的所以我们现在整体来说能够保持80%以上的开工率，我们觉得就是还是可以取得比较好的收益。
Okay, thank you. So, would you like a higher quota, higher export quota?
这个主要是受国家政策的限制，因为从国家来说，进口了原油，然后加工之后再出口，只是赚了比较小的一个利润，但是所有的污染、能耗都是留在中国。所以这个肯定是一个非常重要的考量，不会很高的比例，非常少。对于我的能力来说，应该是比较小的一个份额。
Yeah. Okay. So it's a balancing act. I think what we're hearing is it's a balancing act, and I think the other balancing act that refiners are trying to play is, how to manage the sort of immediate objectives of putting more fuel into the market with this, making this longer term transition. So it's obviously very challenging. And I guess, Amber, when you think about how you're going to make that transition, what are the things that worry you? What are the things that kind of keep you up at night? Potential pitfalls?
So I think probably my biggest worry is around the safety of our plants. And that is just something that's always very tenuous, and I think if you ask anybody that's in the operating area, they're always going to tell you that's our #1 priority, and I think it's always at risk. But I think, if I elaborate on that a bit, the regulatory environment and the changing of that creates a lot of challenges, and it goes back to the people that are at the forefront of our operating plant, because it's been very difficult in the refining industry, especially over the past 4 to 5 years. And it was, margins were very tight during COVID. It's a challenging business to be in, as it always has been to begin with. Not a lot of people love you when you show up in the room sometimes. And it was very clear at that point when you were seeing what we thought was an extremely rapid energy transition. And it was probably the time where we reflected, if we don't figure out how to do something different, we will be extinct. And that was incredibly empowering, because it forced us to look and think differently of how do you reimagine what these refineries need to look like for the future. It reiterated how competitive you have to be in order to be that last refinery standing. But then it starts to say, okay, we know we need to do biofuels here, we know we need to do SAF here, we need to be thinking about hydrogen here and trying to get those investments in place. And when that regulatory environment shifts and we say, not that project right now, it's incredibly emotional for the people at the sites. And it's incredibly distracting sometimes. And that's where I tie it back to the risk on safety. And so, you know, we really, really focus hard on how do you make sure that, you know, it's the hardest thing we do is asking people to show up every day and do the dull well, is what I call it. And that sounds like people are just coming to work every day, day in and day out, but we expect excellence at all times, and that's very tricky to do. So I think that's what I would say keeps me up at night. I think the great thing is that we know that we need to look different for the future. And so we're into the problem-solving mode, and that can be really, really exciting. And I think being part of BP and our aims and ambitions that have been very aggressive actually forced us to really think big. And so, you know, we know what we want to do, but I do think refining is key to the future, and that's incredibly exciting. It is a place where we can leverage our existing hydrocarbon footprint and incorporate the biofuels, incorporate SAF, and incorporate hydrogen. And that really provides us an opportunity. I've got, you know, the oldest, I think, very old refinery is about 140 years old. And you always wonder, okay, well, what does that look like for the next 100 years? And when you think about, you know, reimagining and transitioning to integrated energy hubs, I now can actually have confidence that I can see that for the next 100 years and what that looks like.
That's really interesting, and I think we definitely agree. I definitely agree that the industry is going to be dynamic, exciting, an exciting place to work for the foreseeable future as we go through this transition. So Chris, Amber mentioned some of the challenges of assessing what creates value today, right? And just how difficult it is to FID some of these projects, right? Given the uncertainty. I mean, do refiners have to take billion-dollar bets right now on, you know, hydrogen projects or CCS or SAF, or are there more incremental things that they can do that are sort of no-regrets moves?
I leave those big decisions for the well-paid folks in the refineries. But you mentioned 3 or 4 things there. I think some of them have to be done. So SAF is coming. You'll need a regulation of 10% of SAF by 2030 mixed in aviation fuel. So it's going to change the market. So there's things like SAF that you have to do. Do you place your bet on hydrogen? Maybe, because it's, well, we see a lot of hydrogen, but hydrogen in small scale feeding into local power. So hydrogen as a fuel, maybe. And that's maybe the challenge, is placing those bets when they're big billion-dollar bets or multi-hundred million bets. Another thing we haven't mentioned, because it's the, let's say, the less glamorous side of sustainability, is scope 1. So in amongst changing your fuels and your biofuels and SAF and the like, you need to look at moving your refining asset to being close to net zero in its operation, which is a big source of capital, at least for electrifying your processes, for stopping leaks, for stopping methane leaks, for changing to hydrogen compression, because you'll find that I think, in the more regulated parts of the world, will become a barrier to operation. And maybe a thought, because Amber triggered I guess I was going to say I'm an old refiner in both senses of the word. I'm a refiner and I'm old. But in the 1980s, if some of you can remember that far back, there, for me, was nothing more exciting than working in the oil industry, right? I'm not sure that's how it is today, and it's a worry, I think, for all of us, depending on where you live again, of how do we get the best and the brightest talent into the industry when the market positioning for the less informed is go into green technologies, go into electrification and so forth. So that's kind of, and we notice that just in how we gather our best engineers to support the different markets we're in. Most folks want to be in digital technologies, which we love, but getting folks to be in the chemical engineering is more challenging.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. I mean, we're almost out of time, and I've got loads more questions that I'd love to ask you all. So maybe I'm just going to direct a quick question to each of you, right? And that question is, given the complexity that we've talked about this morning and the challenges that you're all facing, I mean, what's the one thing that could change to make life easier for you? So maybe I'll start with you, Abdullah.
Dan, the things that will really make us focus on a clearer plan of how to reach our goals, especially where I come from, we have already launched our energy transition strategy last of October, and it was endorsed by the highest level of Kuwait. So it's an ambition strategy. By the year 2050, we have to achieve our Scope 1 and Scope 2 plans. Along with that, there is a big CAPEX required. I think we heard our Sheikh Nawaf, our group CEO, mention that we're looking at 100 billion of CAPEX from now till 2050 to fund all those requirements. We need to be more understanding of how to manage the energy transition. We need to be more responsible of how from today till that target set, how can really we bridge that gap? How do we be responsible of making cleaner fuel, exiting from the fossil fuel? As we heard maybe a couple of years ago, things were like we were just switching off, but the reality, no, this transition stage has to be managed. But you have to be a responsible producer of making sure you're producing lower emission, fuels, and that also will take initiatives, and it will take some effort and some financing toward it. Yeah. So this is what we are now having, and this is the plan, and this is the current initiated studies that we have. How can we reach that year 2050? From today until that day, we understand fossil fuel will be there, the demand on fuel will be there, and we're not in isolation from the other producers. So this is something we need everyone to come together, understand that collaboration of transiting this period is very important. But sudden switch off and exiting from fossil fuel, I think everybody's now acknowledging it's not happening.
Yeah. Great. So just maybe one word from each of you. Amber, what's the one thing that would make life easier for you?
Regulatory consistency.
Okay, great. Chris?
I think we've got to own it together. So collaborate and look into the future and make some decisions.
Okay. And Mr. Yuan?
我们可能更关注于研发，特别是清洁能源的技术研发与应用。
Okay, great. Well, that's it. I mean, we're out of time. I think we've heard just how complex it's going to be to navigate the transition, but also heard some very positive things as well. And I think what's come across to me is the excitement that you all feel about navigating this challenge, and really also the sense of responsibility that you feel not just towards your colleagues and your teams, but the communities and the customers that we serve. So please join me in giving a warm applause to our panelists. Thank you.